We're going to take a look at two ways to work on panoramas in Lightroom and Photoshop. The first way is to take a single photo and just crop it. So that's what I'm going to do here, starting off with the crop tool under Develop. And there are some presets there. You've got a 16:9 preset and a 16:10 preset, and those match up pretty well with widescreen televisions or widescreen computer monitors. You can also input your own aspect ratio, and 2:1 is a very common one. And then you just drag up and down to adjust that. And then maybe you want to go wider, maybe 3:1. We'll enter another custom ratio, 3:1 here, which might be a little bit too narrow. Always depends on the image, but you can always go back and adjust that and fine-tune it. We'll try 2.5:1 and see how that works. Not bad. That'll work. But I think what I'm going to do is use 3:1 for this particular image. And now I go in and work on the normal exposure, tone controls, sharpening, and all the normal steps that I do for a given image. I won't go into as much detail on this. We've been through these steps often enough now to know that you've got to have a lot of clarity, but just generally tuning in the settings. Tweak the white balance a little bit. And I think what I need to do is darken the sky a little bit. That sunspot on the right side is just a little bit bright. So I'll go into a gradient filter, drop the exposure by, 1/4 of a stop ought to do it. Drag that. Decrease the highlights a little bit as well. And then increase the range of the gradient. And there's a single frame looking pretty good. I'll go in and apply some sharpening. We'll check the birds here. That should be a nice contrasty target to check for sharpness. Once again, holding the Option key to switch to black and white mode and get a better view of the amount. Hold Option again to see how the radius will affect the edges. And holding Option to add the mask and see how that will affect things. And I'm going to add just a little bit of luminance noise reduction again. The color noise reduction is looking pretty good. All right, not bad. There's the single frame. Now the disadvantage is I can only print that so big, but if I have the same scene shot with multiple frames with a narrower angle of view, I can stitch those together and get the same scene more or less, but be able to print it a lot larger. What I'm doing here is checking my exposures. I was at a narrower angle of view at 35mm compared to 18mm for the single frame, and all my exposures are shot with all the settings locked in, 5.6, 1/90th of a second, ISO 100, and even the white balance is locked in, probably to daylight or cloudy on this. So what I'm going to go through is take a look at these, and generally what I want to do is work from the brightest frame in the stack. And I'm going to do some initial adjustments in the Develop module. So we see there the histogram on the darker frame is a little bit lower, but on the lighter frame it's moved toward the right. So I can increase exposure across the stack a little bit, but I don't necessarily want to blow out highlights on that bright area. So I'll increase the exposure there a bit, and I'm going to decrease contrast just to bring that histogram in toward the center a bit more. Give me a bit more leeway and control over the highlights and shadows. Pull the highlights down a little bit more just to keep those bright areas under control. I cannot apply a gradient to this because it would be uneven across all the images in the stack. I have to wait on the gradient until after I stitch together. And I can pull the shadows up just a little bit here just to to brighten up that those darker areas. A little bit of whites and a little bit blacks. Not too much. And I'm going to leave clarity alone until after I stitch the images together. And I'm also going to hold off on vibrance in this case. You can change vibrance and saturation beforehand, but in this example I'm going to hold off until after I stitch everything together. Now what I want to do also is apply some sharpening. Unfortunately, this stack is a little bit softer. My focus point was just a bit off as I shot these. But I will apply some sharpening here to sort of bring back some detail, a little bit of detail if I can. Once again, holding the Option key to see the previews as I go through the various settings. And I'll up the detail a bit to add the impression of detail. And a bit of masking to smooth out the smooth areas. And once again, 10 points of luminance noise reduction. Now here I want to make sure that I've checked off my lens corrections if they exist. Lightroom has preset lens corrections for a lot of the common lenses. In this case, my 18-70 Nikon lens, it's got a preset for that. What that does is clean up some of the optical defects, some curvature that shouldn't be there, and also vignetting around the edges where the edges get darker. And I also want to go to color and check remove chromatic aberration, which cleans up some of the fine edge details. So then I select all the images in the stack, making sure that I didn't deselect that initial image that I worked on, because that has to act as my anchor so I can synchronize my settings. Normally I check none and only do a single setting at a time to synchronize, but since I'm doing a panorama and I want all the images to be equalized, to have the same settings, I check all to make sure everything gets matched up among these 6 images. Synchronize, and that applies all the exposure, tone, sharpening, lens corrections that I've applied on the first image. So it's important that that first image be your first selection before you synchronize. So now I've got the stack ready to go into Photoshop for the stitch. So I'll select all those 6 images, go to Photo, Edit In, and then Merge to Panorama. And then wait for Photoshop to load. I have a few options here in the Photo Merge dialog. Auto tries to figure out the mapping automatically based on the number of images in the field of view covered. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I usually try to pick either perspective or cylindrical, sometimes spherical, but more often than not perspective or cylindrical. Perspective has the disadvantage of stretching out the edges on really wide images. Spherical has the disadvantage of curving lines. In this case, since it is a wide image that we're going to end up with, I'm going to choose cylindrical and accept the curved lines. I always want to blend images together, otherwise I'll see the seams where they overlap. But in this case, I'm not going to turn on vignette removal or geometric distortion correction. I already fixed those up with that lens correction profile in Lightroom. If I didn't have that, I would want to check those 2 options. At this point, Photoshop is going to load up the images and automatically match them together where the overlaps occur and line everything up for me. It does a pretty good job with this kind of setup, a single row panorama, and it works pretty well for multi-row panoramas. When you're trying to do a full 360-degree image, that's where Photoshop sort of breaks down with its panoramas. And then you're looking at using a dedicated piece of software like Hugin, that's Hugin, which is a free program, or something like Auto Pano Pro is another one, I believe, and that's about, I think, 200 euros. But I do recommend Hugin for your 360-degree panoramas. The newer versions, as of fall 2012, they do a really nice job of matching up all the images and stitching the whole thing together. So at this point, we're waiting for Photoshop to calculate everything, load the images, and map them together. Once again, of course, 16-bit images will take a little bit longer to process. It's really dependent on the number of images and how fast your computer is. So we'll let this run through. So here we have nearly finished. We're now on the blending stage, which can take a while, of course, once again. And this is where Photoshop is finding the areas of overlapped images that it can show and hide. It's using masks to show and hide various parts of the images so that they appear to line up properly. So here's a view of the full composition. You see some curved lines there, and that's the result of using the cylindrical mapping. Okay, I'll get these windows arranged here. Now take a look at the mask. We've got the 6 images there lined up from left to right with the corresponding masks which show and hide various portions. Let's hide all of these. You see where that overlap happens, that mask, which shows the portion in white and hides the portion in black. And that's how the images are arranged in this particular case. Now you might see some sort of spider web crack designs there, and that is just an artifact of the image being scaled down so far. Those lines will not show up in the full-sized image, as we see when I zoom in here. And here's another view of the overlap. It does a pretty good job of blending these together since they're more organic shapes and objects. Man-made pieces, architecture, it has a better chance of having bad seams where you can see a shift or a jump instead of a nice smooth line. But natural images like this, the program works pretty well. And as you can see, there's a nice amount of detail here. I'm zoomed in at 100%, and it's taking forever to pan across the image. So at this point, it's nearly finished. I could simply crop this and call it good, but I do want to fill in those blank areas all around the sides. So first I'm going to merge visible, not flatten, just merge visible, because I want to keep that transparent area. Having the transparency, I found, makes it easier to do the content-aware fill that we're going to do in a couple minutes. If you have a solid color background, a white or a black background, that can sometimes cause some issues with the content-aware algorithm. It can cause it to blend and bleed with whatever color your background has. But with a transparent background, there's nothing to bleed with. So I'm going to take my wand tool there and then click on the transparent area. In this case, it's going to select all around all 4 sides. But what I want to do for make things a little bit easier is deselect the sides and bottom using this third selection option, subtract from selection. Then I drag around that whole thing, starting inside the image, and come back, so that only the top part is selected. Just focusing on that. Now I need to enlarge that, select, modify, expand, and by about 2 pixels. And that'll help eliminate some seam issues where there'd otherwise be a blank transition, a real fine line. Then I go to Edit, Fill, and under Contents I go Use Content Aware. What that does is analyze nearby portions of the image and fills in the selection. And it's a pretty useful algorithm. It even hits those clouds on the upper left corner and pulls in some of that texture. So I'll let that process for a little bit. The larger the selected area, the larger the image, of course, the longer it will take. All right, there's a fill. I will deselect that and take a look, and it's pretty good, except for that upper right corner. So I'm going to have the lasso tool again and just select that odd portion and apply another content-aware fill. Takes care of that problem. So with that done, move on to the sides. Once again, another selection, and then back to the lasso tool to deselect the bottom and the other side. Once again, dragging, starting inside the image and then dragging around all the way outside and up and over. So now just the left side selected. Once again, modify and expand that a little bit. And then edit and fill. Content aware once again. This is a really smooth area, so it's not going to cause much of an issue. Deselect that. That'll work. Magic wand again, another selection. Lasso tool, remove the bottom again. Just the side now, and then we modify and expand. Same as before, and then, can you guess what the next step is? Yep, that's right. And deselect that. That'll work. Okay, last piece, the bottom. Now this piece actually has some variation in texture and tone. So this is where the content aware formula can mess up from time to time, and we'll see some off areas probably show up in the results where it looks a little bit too smooth. Okay, I'll let it process there and see what happens. Okay, I'll deselect once again, and I can see a few smooth areas there. It would do well to use the lasso on some of those smooth areas and do another content aware fill and pull in some texture. You can also start using the healing tools, the healing brush and the clone tool on this to clean up some of those off areas. But we'll leave that for now. Save the image, and it'll be either a PSD or a TIFF depending on your Lightroom settings, and it should show up in the library with the original image stack. Once again, naturally, the larger the image, the longer it'll take to save. All right, and there's the finished panorama. Take a look at the two of these. I'm going to press the N key to show them side by side, and then the C key to switch to compare mode, and Shift Tab hides the other toolbars and thumbnails. So here, now we have the appearance that the smaller image is sharper, and that's just because it does have a better focus than my larger stack. But we see the potential here of the extra detail that can be obtained with doing multiple shots. And now I'll finish up developing this finished panorama. Add my clarity and a little bit of vibrance. And then I want to pull the shadows up a bit more. A little fine-tuning on my adjustments. And now I can add that gradient adjustment because the stack is stitched together and ready to go. So there's a panorama, 2 ways of doing a panorama. Hopefully that's proved helpful.